Welcome to Conversations with Des. I'm Des Blanchfield. I'm joined today by Kris Dornan, the Marketing Manager for Logix Controllers at Rockwell Automation. Kris, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Des, I'm so happy to be here. It's always good to talk subjects, and what we're talking about today is crucial for any company out there today.
Indeed, very excited to have you here. So folks, today we're going to be talking about the adoption and need for smart manufacturing. We're going to be looking at some of the impacts of the evolving workforce. And we're also going to be looking at how to get started with implementing a smart manufacturing system. But before we dive into that, Kris, I wonder if you could give us a brief overview of what a day in the life of Kris Dornan is like in your role as Marketing Manager for Logix Controllers for Rockwell Automation currently, and maybe just a few insights into kind of what your role entails.
Absolutely, Des. And you see marketing first, and I'd say that's where my passion has been in my 15 years at Rockwell. Because with any company that delivers smart solutions or product, if you can't create a message that makes sense to most people and easy to repeat, what are we doing? We're wasting money on technology if we can't find value with it. So currently, what I market is really what I think is the central piece of any control system, and that being the controller. So anything that happens from a technology basis, we can be part of. And it's kind of fun being on a leading edge for a company like Rockwell, who, over 115 years, I believe now of existence, but a company that had always made their mark of selling product, with feature sets. And I think today, we would both agree that the buying behavior is much more, I have a problem, or here's what's keeping me up at night, or here's what I need to do, and tell me what I should do, architect a system for me. So there's a transformation that has had to happen that I've seen at Rockwell, that we have to talk that way. We have to engineer our systems that way so that it's more on the interaction and how we address problems. So to be part of that, I just think is an awesome piece to be. And if anything on my day in the life, it's basically translation, Des. It's being able to talk to engineers about what we're doing, but having a home for that. So talking to a customer and understanding, if I can't translate what we're doing to something that would make you think that maybe I should buy this, then I'm not doing my job. So a lot of that's internal, external. But I love to be out in front of customers. I love to listen. And sometimes that sets you up and you can't have the scripted answer, but that's okay. You really have to think and brainstorm with someone to really believe that there are solutions and common ways to get there. But everybody's journey is be different. And that's okay. That's kind of cool.
I can imagine you jump out of bed every day wanting to go to work, because it sounds like a fascinating role. And looking at your background, you've been there for nearly 15 years. So you've certainly seen various evolutions of the organization, and we're right now on the cusp of a very exciting pivot yet again with a whole bunch of new technologies, which we'll dive into in a moment, in particular 5G and other issues around cybersecurity. Well, fantastic. Well, thanks for that. Well, let's now dive right into today's topic of smart manufacturing. The first thing I wanted to talk about was, I guess, the adoption and the need for smart manufacturing. So let's start with that. What's driving the adoption of smart manufacturing systems in your view?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's selling where people see that there's a need to buy. I always had a boss that told me, if you're not doing what the customer's asking for, you're really not providing value. So in the simplest form, smart manufacturing really delivers better performance. And anybody that does any kind of, making of a product, if you can gain efficiency or be more productive, that means more money, means less time, it means more money, faster time to market. So any way that you can take advantage of technology, and I'm sure we'll get into some of those details, Des, but now everything, you talk about things like the industrial Internet of Things, everything has an IP address. So every small instrument, any sensor even, can play in this environment and provide information today that they didn't even 5-10 years ago. So being able to be smart, and again, smart can be what's smart to me. I think sometimes you get into a trap to think that smart manufacturing must mean that I'm connected to the cloud, and that's where technology is. No, technology is there. That off-prem type environment is important for a lot of industries. But if I'm working on a printer per se, what's smart for me if I'm on the printer itself is, those neat little tools that tell me what lever I have to lift and push to get to the problem. And that in itself is kind of eye-opening. So smart engineering, smart manufacturing is a great way to say it fills the need that everybody has, is how do I get more out of what I'm doing today? Or how do I be more proactive than reactive? And that all comes from having more information.
Yeah, I imagine, we talk a lot in enterprise world, particularly finance and banking and other spaces around data-driven decision-making, but that must now be impacting a lot of what essentially, you're referring to when you talk about smart manufacturing, where I guess what you're really saying when you think about smart manufacturing is you bring intelligence into the systems and into the platforms, where something that hummed a while ago and had somebody that walked around with a stubby pencil and a checkboard writing down numbers and temperatures off thermometers or times and dates and so forth, and then tallying that somewhere in a card and counting it into the month. Now you can put sensors and monitors on things that are telling you that in real time, all the way through to implementing, machine learning and artificial intelligence and monitoring that data and looking for alerts and things that may not be normal. I imagine you're looking at some point, applying augmented reality for finding those things and overlaying the data. And at the other end of things, potentially a digital twin environment where somewhere in the cloud, one of those environments is physically out in the plant space, whether it's a mine or a manufacturing site or a robotics or engineering or plant or somewhere, there's a copy of it running. And that if it isn't looking normal from the data you're pulling out of that again, it can alert and say, bearing number 5 on wheel number 3 is currently operating too hot and for too long. We might need to put a work request in to get a replacement part and then put a work order in to change it. That must be a journey though. So when you talk about just then the adoption of smart manufacturing, just a quick follow back on that is, when some of these environments are decades old and they just continue to get upgraded and maintained, others are new and they have to be implemented from scratch. There must be a journey that you take people on where they've been in there for a long time and you've got to pick them up in various parts of the journey versus starting from scratch and building a new site.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, even as a vendor, it's not always what you sell, but what experience have you had in that environment. And you can't just make up for 15 years of being in an oil and gas industry or a water wastewater industry. A lot of things that we talk about smart and what people buy is putting things in the context of that expert. And I know we'll talk about the impact on labor. The pandemic, if it taught one thing, is I think automation is going to be much more central in a lot of factories and facilities minds, just because automation can be there when human labor is impacted. And that just ability of taking that journey, a lot of people are starting it right now. So you see a lot of people that maybe have had those workers that are carrying around tablets with pens, but it's hard to hire somebody with a job description of take a tablet and write something down. You're graduating millennials today who expect their smartphone to do everything for them. How connected are you? The world of 30 years ago in any kind of facility where you have a lockdown control room and sitting behind a large screen is gone. Those people are not there anymore, and they're replaced by people who, if they want to work at your facility, you have to take advantage of new technology to do it. But at the same time, still the same things that we've done 15 years ago hold weight today. And you made a point, Des, about being proactive. I mean, you talk about analytics and machine learning and that impact today. It's really how you can even be proactive. And, when these conditions happen, that tells you something. You have a monitoring at a first step. But where you really want to go to is enough learning that says, I've seen these happen before. I want to close that loop. I want to open this valve. I want to start this pump, so that I don't get into a trouble spot where equipment fails, where accidents or a release of something happens. You almost have to take advantage of this technology today because it allows us really to copy that knowledge, not only that the operators bring, who unfortunately are retiring, but even our own experience. Because all of us have engineering backgrounds. I started in a delivery organization, and how best then to really talk about what we sell in the context of what it did for me when I was in that spot. So you can tell it's a passionate subject. And I think a lot of times, people just aren't giving it the attention it deserves, because our industry has been one that, I could buy something and set it and forget it for 25, 30 years. That's just not possible anymore. Number one, just because products, software, and so forth aren't supported for that length of time anymore. Hard to get parts. But at the same time, would you really want to? Moore's law and everything is changing technology to the point that if you're not staying on top of it, you can rapidly become last in the race when it comes to being productive. So why would you want to do that? You want to be able to stay on top of the technology curve, understand where your system is, understand the life cycle, and be aware of the technology that's out there, which I know we'll talk about, but there are things that you can do. It's not a technology sale. Technology for the sake of technology is not going to do anything, but I always like talking about the results and what it does when you have this technology.
Indeed, I think in many ways, when I think about the brand of Rockwell Automation, what organizations are buying into is a partner of choice that can take them on that journey at any point they enter into it, with that depth of knowledge, with the breadth of knowledge around it, and as you said, that multiple generation of human beings that are either been there for decades or are new entrants with new ideas and new ways to approach it. And to that point, I guess you mentioned an interesting thing just a moment ago. I wonder if we can now pivot to that. That evolution of today's workforce, and in particular the impact it's having on the adoption of smart manufacturing systems. I wonder if you could just give us a little insight into what you're seeing around how the evolution of today's workforce is playing a part in the adoption of smart manufacturing systems.
Absolutely. And I think there was a key event that really put a larger light on this subject, and that was the pandemic that we're coming out of. Because I think a lot of people saw that working from home and being remote, number one, was a brand new journey for a lot of people. And I think people that were more comfortable in the virtual environment of doing meetings that we're doing over Zoom right now, and being able to transition to that space, there sometimes are benefits to that. For a lot of workers, they saw that as the time to get out, because there was a hesitancy to jump into a new technology served industry where things are different, and I don't have the same skill sets that I think are needed to be effective today. So unfortunately, a lot of people that probably still wanted to work for maybe another 3, 4, 5 years are taking that opportunity, because things have changed so much, to retire. And in the automation space, or even when you talk about smart manufacturing, a lot of the smarts were in the heads of the seasoned operators at the system. I mean, they knew things before it happened. They knew when they saw these two temperatures or pressure acting in a certain behavior, they'd go out and do something because it's happened to them before. So how do you replicate that is really the question. So, and companies need to. And I think that's where the system comes into play in smart manufacturing, because everything that plays into a smart manufacturing experience can actually take that knowledge forward. The sensors that measure level, temperature, pressure, speed, they themselves are smarter. They themselves now are passing more information than what they used to. Now, that gets us into a big data conversation, Des, and I'm not going to tell you that big data is an answer, because sometimes that can overcomplicate what was used to be easy. As a vendor and someone that has knowledge in industries and applications, you have to put that data that is now served up in the right context, so it's repeatable and it's easy for, and I forget if I'm a Gen X, Gen Y, or millennials, where we're graduating our next generation operators and users from today, live in that environment where, they have a cell phone and they can be wherever they need to be and be effective whenever that is. And how do they see the information different than how the old engineers did? And how do we empower the assets at the facility to make some of those decisions and become smarter, and the information actually gets put in the right context to any user, which makes even new operators very effective in controlling the facility, because there are enough smarts and things that can be automated, that can be, learned. Machine learning even takes the opportunity to understand how an operator reacts to certain alarms. And if there are ways just, aborting them or just setting them aside, the machine should understand that I'm not going to give you those type of alerts in the future, because obviously they're not helping you do your job. So why not take advantage of technology to fill in some of those gaps? And we see it, and we see it, and it becomes a tough topic, right? Because people look at automation as kind of a job eraser, and I'll combat that to say it's really a job creator. It's just a different jobs that are created. It's being able to contextualize and understand the information that we have at play and make it easier to take in and use. That makes people effective. Maybe it's a little bit of a different job, but it really can empower people to take it to that next step. It's like schooling and everything. Learning goes on top of learning. So if the system can come to the base level where the operators were, then you can go beyond what had been done in the past to have really a unique way and a new way of gaining value. And if you're not ensuring that your system can play in this new environment and be digital or have a digital twin, and I'm sure we'll talk about that too, you're really losing out on some opportunity to be more effective and use the time that you have and the labor that you have effectively.
Indeed, you remind me of that phrase of we're standing on the shoulders of giants. I can imagine that when you work with a lot of the organizations you have as customers or partners and integrators and resellers, in many ways they probably don't realize it, but they are quite literally standing on the shoulders of giants working with Rockwell Automation, that you do have that depth and breadth. One of the things you mentioned just a moment ago, I wonder if I can circle back on, is retaining talent and also attracting talent. And this is a real issue, not just with regard to the pandemic and the great resignation that we hear a lot about, but over the decades, organizations, particularly the types of companies you work with, where there are very large environments, very large physical sites or deployed globally, large mining sites that might be a big hole in the ground versus transport, logistics, aviation, where they've got infrastructure all around the world. You want to retain that older generation with their knowledge and experience for as long as you can, and all the value that they bring, and also the fact that they just know how the business runs. But at the same time, you want to attract the brightest and the greatest new entrants to the workforce. That must be something that Rockwell Automation and you in your role work very closely with your customers to help them work out how to, I guess, live and breathe in that challenge of how do we retain our older talent and keep that knowledge there, bring that knowledge into the systems you're implementing, but at the same time, attract the new talent to the market. That, I imagine that must be a big part of why they come to you and your organization, particularly there at Rockwell Automation, to help them understand that challenge and implement ways and means to implement solutions to keep older people there and to attract younger people.
Absolutely does. And what you're just saying is I think if any customer would come to me and they have two concerns when it comes to control, it's cybersecurity is one, but the other is this workforce issue on both sides. I have seasoned operators leaving, and how do I attract that next generation of talent? So you're exactly right. And sometimes, we have to ask the hard questions because, what do you have? How dated is the systems that you're using? Because even for Rockwell, if we didn't create new technology, we'd be losing out to any, smaller company that's on the cusp of technology. Rockwell's a large company, but I think we've been able to survive because we aren't afraid to adapt to technology, even in a pandemic. A lot of us had to be comfortable of doing virtual meetings and the empowering of Microsoft Teams. But a lot of us, I think now, if you had to ask me if I had to pick between my cell phone or my smartphone and my laptop, I'd pick my smartphone because it's more easily used. It gives me more access to a lot of things. And in automation and in this topic of smart manufacturing, it's the same way. We have to actually instruct people to look at this topic because they may not understand that the control room I have today is not going to be a place where a out-of-school operator wants to work. That would turn them off. So how do you attract talent is one, and one is making sure you have new technology. Even Rockwell's product, as an example, does one of our visualization hardware platforms, the VersaView explicitly, was built to have kind of that info button similar to an Apple device that people know, hey, that's where I go to for help. And if we can mimic some of that experience and that knowledge based on today's technology, that in a way makes our stuff cooler, easier, more intuitive to use. And that's just an example of which. So you have to make the technology match what the technology is serving other industries at, or you're not going to be able to attract talent, number one. Number two is just how you capture that data so these new people can be effective. And as we talked about a lot of times, the sensors, the machine can learn. There are even a lot of tool sets that, how do you just even have those conversations with your seasoned talent? I saw you just do something there on, you've been here forever. Why'd you do that? And well, he says, I look to be this. I mean, that's what even historians are used for, as much as you can empower your system. And sometimes that base assessment, and I'll start there a lot, Des, because everybody's journey is going to be different, but at the same time, you have to know where you're at. You have to have some kind of goal in mind, and we'll help you with that too. But we'll take you on that journey and ask the questions that will result in the solution that will make most sense for you. But a lot of that is that assessment on the tool sets. When's the last time you looked at this? Are you even dealing with a system that can be supported today? Maybe you could buy parts, but is there anybody left in your organization that knows how to use that system? So even that in itself, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And it's just become that more important because the light has shined onto smart manufacturing, automation, because the pandemic has created so much opportunity with the supply chain the way it is. And how do I empower larger productivity using automation? So it's an important topic we discussed, Des, but it's so much more important now. And if anything, I hope when people watch this and take away is just understand, I can't just sit on this all the time anymore, because you're losing money. Let's face it. You're not taking advantage of technology that it can empower your next generation of workers and give them a place where it's exciting to work. And,
Indeed.
That's what we do.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of organizations that I work with and have over the last couple of decades, and I know you probably had the same experiences, that often our human resources an area where the return on investment isn't always as well leveraged as possible, and people feel bad about trying to get more value out of the humans. But at the end of the day, that's why you're investing the best talent you can get in the first place. And you reminded me a moment ago about that whole concept of just keeping up with the times, which probably sounds like an old-fashioned term, but I use it a lot when I talk about some of the things that you've just mentioned there, because the type of learning that people want and expect today in younger generations is that Netflix experience of on demand and watch the video and teach myself, versus older generations wanting to sit in a meeting room and whiteboards and coffee and tea and biscuits and have someone instruct them. And I guess somewhere in there there's a middle ground where you do both. Well, I wonder if I could get you to walk us through my final question for you, which is, getting started with manufacturing and the overall journey of it. We spoke a little bit about that earlier on around the challenge that you probably have with your customers there at Rockwell Automation, where some have been in it decades and some are just getting into it, whether a startup or an organization that's got big infrastructure just hasn't made it intelligent and smart. What does an organization need in order to start with implementing smart manufacturing systems and solutions? And what role in particular do suppliers play in that journey?
Absolutely. And we have to make it easy, because at the end of the day, we can sell a lot of our taglines are a connected enterprise or, smart manufacturing. If we don't define that well and we give a pathway to get there, we don't want to be in a situation where it's like, I love this idea that you showed us where things could be, but how do I buy it from you? How do I get there? So it's a different journey, as I've talked about a lot, but the steps are similar. It always has to be an assessment of what you have today. Are you still supported, number one? Do you have the workforce to support the system you have? Does your system talk the latest languages so that you can play in this environment and talk to the next generation of instrumentation and sensors and so forth? And if not, sometimes that's just incremental steps. Not all of this has to be done at once is the important thing we always say is, the end goal doesn't mean you have to get there tomorrow. Every little step you can make can get you closer to where you need to be, but you have to start somewhere. And we work around a lot of different budgets. We work for things that are fully funded. We work for things that say I only have a maintenance budget to use, and we can work around that. But it is an assessment of what you have, and it has to be a common vision and a shared goal for the company of where they want to go. And a lot of times that's education on the facilities parts that we have to take on. If we want to sell our wares, let's let companies know what the new technology is. How does information allow me to create a faceplate or a common element so that any operator, because as we said, and I even do this myself, I don't like looking in manuals anymore. I want to work on systems that are intuitive. So how do we provide that consistency and that out of the box feel that doesn't preclude me from having to have my manual truth table right next to me so I know what I'm doing? And it's actually a good segue to talk about that is really creating a digital representation of the plant to begin with. You know, you have so many things now that we talk about, even analytics, and how can you be proactive rather than reactive. You know, it's always a way to think of just your building of a facility too. You know, you used to have to just create all this stuff, and then you'd have to wait for the cement to dry and have everything up and running before you could even test operators on the system. You know, today's digital technology, you hear it mentioned in so many different ways: digital twin, digital engineering. But I usually say it's how do you create a digital representation of your facility? And what that does for you is it allows you to ask and answer some of those questions before even the ink dries or the cement dries. You could train an operator on a digital representation of your system so it doesn't do unsafe things. You're not, you know, breaking a reactor. You're not releasing toxic gas. But at the same time, you're creating an environment where your operators can be much more impactful by having gone through those scenarios in a digital environment space. So you go everything from training to optimization. You know, one of our aspects of our software offering right now is a platform called Emulate 3D that allows you to really build out a pick and place machine that will walk you through what the physical space is and what speed are you setting things on. And sometimes you just say, wow, I could never run it at this miles per hour because things would be flying off the machine without me knowing it. And sometimes you don't even get to do that until you actually see the bottles flying around the plant. But as much as you can do earlier in the game, digital engineering, digital threads allow that. And that's how we kind of sell too. There's going to be a digital story you follow. But there's an assessment. You don't want to be afraid. You want to get out there and understand new technology. We're happy to talk to you about it. We feel like we're on that cutting edge and have solutions that play in this latest technology. So we want to talk to you. We want to help you build a plan. We want to be able to define what success looks like. And then we continue the conversation. Now, a lot of times it's a life cycle management thing. You know, it's not just, hey, we've supplied the system, shake your hands and you're off on your own. No. So much of it now is how do you continually improve? How do you continue to look at life cycles and be up to date with what we're offering? Obviously, patches. And cybersecurity is that nasty side on information sharing. You want to pass information, but you want to do it securely. And those cybersecurity threats change on a daily basis. And if you're not having an engaged conversation on a regular basis, which is different in this whole space, you're just not going to put yourself in a position to be successful. But that's why we're here. That's why we have jobs. It is a tough piece, but let us take the onus. Let us help. Let us define a solution that makes sense. We're not going to just show you again. And I'll take my controller hat off of, yeah, I want to sell you a controller, but at the end of the day, I want to sell you a solution that addresses what you want to happen. You know, and I have to be able to architect a solution that could be inclusive of my controllers, but it really offers you a solution to where you want to go tomorrow.
Indeed. And in many ways, you know, just listening to you describing that, you know, how to get started and the key steps there, you know, the thing that came to mind was that, you know, a lot of organizations might start out thinking that you're a supplier of capability of product. But really, I imagine that early on in an engagement, they immediately realize you're actually a business partner and not just a supplier. And that,
Yep.
as you said earlier on, you know, you may have things that they can physically drop on their toe, as it were, in making physical things. But also now more and more, I imagine that it's more a case of developing capabilities to capture data that they can then drop into intelligent systems, to drop into analytics tools. So on one side of things, you've got something you can drop on your toe. On the other side, you've got tools that are capturing the data you can drop into intelligent systems and gain insights. and that journey. And I think it's an exciting time for all operators to be thinking about how they can leverage that. And as you said just a moment ago, start that conversation earlier than later. Look at when, as a partner, you can help them, not just as a supplier of capabilities and devices and software, but that end-to-end journey of professional services, design, implementation, training, and everything else. Well, Kris, I wonder if you could wrap us up with a one-liner. I'd really love you to summarize a lot of what we've spoken about just today here in a bit of an elevator pitch. How do you recommend CEOs approach this discussion at boardroom level around smart manufacturing, obviously, to start that conversation on how do they start taking advantage of what we discussed today?
I love that. And I would say, kind of even what you were just talking about, Des, is a great way to start. Is sometimes you almost have to let your ego get out of the way. It's okay to say, this has gone beyond my knowledge now. I can't afford as a CEO to look at how technology and automation has changed. But at the same time, I can see it. Sometimes I don't want to have to wait until the notice of this part being obsolete before I even start thinking about, having smart manufacturing or getting my system ready to participate in a smart manufacturing environment. So it's partly being able to just say, I may not know what I don't know. But the great thing is sometimes we at Rockwell, your problem is probably not unique. We serve industries and applications, which means we've probably served either your application or one that's very similar to it. And we understand some of the background because we've been there, and we can actually create a journey that walks you through assessing what you have today, understanding that with that application, maybe at your competitor down the road, we were able to look at the problem in this way where it allows you to be more effective. And obviously we're protecting intellectual property, but on some large scales, you could say, hey, did you realize that people are doing this and really being effective? We can do something similar for you. We have to be not afraid to ask the tough questions and be able to think on our feet. And that's why a lot of things that I do, and I'm happy about at Rockwell, is providing the detail of how we have to behave now as a vendor and as a consultant rather than a selling organization. We're not effective until we become that partner, to your point, Des. So again, you have to just be willing to start the journey. Come talk to us, because then we'll teach you about what's available to you today and really craft a story that makes sense for your timing, makes sense for your budget, and really get you on a pathway where you're not in a position where a problem or a lack of availability puts you into a downtime. And unfortunately, downtime's money, downtime's space. And even if we can save you some of that in itself sometimes pays for itself. If you're down for an hour, how much money is that costing you? You wouldn't want to have to even entertain that, would you? So again, it's us translating, but you have to take the first step to just look into this and reach out to us. So I would tell anybody, make sure you find out, look at, and I believe I've worked at Rockwell for 15 years, that we're a great ethical company. Ethisphere just acknowledged Rockwell again of being one of the world's most ethical companies. And you can see that's how we do business. We're focused on the customer satisfaction, even to our own detriment sometimes, supporting the PLC 5 now that we released 40 years ago or more, right? We don't want to leave customers not in a way where they can get to safety. So I'm excited about what we do, Des. I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm more happy to have people talk to us and share us where they're at and let us help you in your journey.
Perfect. Yes. Well, the key thing there for me was start that journey early, start the conversation, reach out to yourself and your team there at Rockwell Automation, and in many ways develop a language and a vocabulary with which they can converse with you with it, and then bring it back in their boardroom and then have it permeate through the rest of the organization. Kris, it has been so great to catch up with you today, and
absolutely, same here, Des.
We will definitely continue this conversation and further conversations there. I mean, we could talk all day on each of these 3 points. And for our audience, we will definitely have links in the show description to the Rockwell Automation website, links to other resources on their web portal, and also a download for a free ebook for you to get started with, which I think is titled Smart Starts Here, which is a fantastic guide that Rockwell has developed that you can get for free as a PDF ebook to read. I've read it 10 times already and still getting stuff out of it. Also, please follow Kris on various social media platforms. I know he'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn, and certainly Rockwell Automation on your various favorite social media platforms. And as Kris said, reach out and start a conversation sooner than later and discuss how they can help you and your organization today. Kris, thanks for your time, and we'll look forward to having you back at the show again soon.
Excellent. Thanks, Des.
Thank you. Cheers, Kris.